In the swirling chaos of late 18th century Europe, a time of revolution, upheaval, and shifting empires, one name would soon echo across the continent: Napoleon Bonaparte. This was an era where monarchies trembled and the very foundations of society were being questioned. The French Revolution had torn down the old order, creating a power vacuum filled with ambition, fear, and opportunity. It was in this fiery crucible that a young, ambitious artillery officer from Corsica would begin his meteoric ascent. Born into minor nobility, Napoleon's early life gave little hint of the colossal figure he would become. He was an outsider, a scholarship student at a French military academy, often teased for his Corsican accent and modest background. But beneath that quiet exterior burned a fierce intelligence and an unyielding will to succeed. The revolution was his ladder. While many officers of the old royal army fled France, Napoleon saw his chance. He embraced the revolutionary ideals, or at least the opportunities they presented. His first real taste of glory came at the Siege of Toulon in 1793. The city had rebelled against the Republic and was occupied by British and Spanish forces. The French Republican army was stalled, unable to break the siege. A young Captain Bonaparte, just 24 years old, devised a brilliant and audacious plan: seize the high ground overlooking the harbor. From there, his artillery could bombard the enemy fleet, forcing them to abandon the city. His superiors were skeptical, but they had few other options. Napoleon's plan worked flawlessly. The enemy ships were driven out, and Toulon fell. For his ingenuity and courage under fire, he was promoted to brigadier general. The name Napoleon Bonaparte was now on the lips of the powerful in Paris. His rise continued at a breathtaking pace. In 1795, when a royalist mob threatened the revolutionary government in Paris, it was Napoleon who was called upon to defend the capital. Famously, he dispersed the crowd with a whiff of grapeshot, a brutal but effective use of cannon fire that saved the Directory, the government of the time. His reward was command of the French army in Italy. What followed was a military campaign that would become the stuff of legend. He took a demoralized, poorly supplied army and, through sheer force of will and tactical genius, led them to a string of stunning victories against the Austrians. He was a master of speed, surprise, and concentration of force, often defeating larger armies by attacking their weakest points before they could react. He returned to France not just as a general, but as a national hero. The people saw in him a savior, a man of action who could bring order to the chaos and glory to France. He was more popular than the weak and corrupt Directory he served. Seeing his opportunity, in 1799, he staged a coup d'etat, overthrowing the government and establishing a new one, the consulate. As first consul, he held all the real power. The revolution, in many ways, was over. The age of Napoleon had begun. From first consul to emperor, the transition was both calculated and inevitable. In 1804, in a magnificent ceremony at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, Napoleon Bonaparte crowned himself Emperor of the French. In a symbolic act of ultimate authority, he took the crown from the hands of the Pope and placed it on his own head, then crowned his wife, Josephine, as Empress. This wasn't just a coronation, it was a statement. He was not a king by divine right, but an emperor by his own merit and the will of the French people, or so the propaganda claimed. He was the master of his own destiny, and now the master of France. As emperor, Napoleon embarked on a series of military campaigns that would redraw the map of Europe. The Napoleonic Wars saw his Grande Army, the Grand Army, become the most formidable fighting force on the continent. His genius on the battlefield was undeniable. He was the master of the decisive battle, seeking to annihilate his enemy's army in a single, crushing engagement. Consider the Battle of Austerlitz in 1805, often called his masterpiece. Facing a larger, combined force of Russian and Austrian troops, Napoleon used deception to lure them into a trap. He deliberately weakened his right flank, tempting the Allies to attack it. As they committed their forces, he had his main army, hidden by the morning fog, smash through their now weakened center, splitting their army into and achieving a devastating victory. It was a triumph of strategy and psychology. A year later, at the Battle of Jena, he inflicted crushing defeat on the vaunted Prussian army, an army that had coasted for decades on the reputation of Frederick the Great. The speed and ferocity of the French attack shattered the Prussians, and the myth of their invincibility, in a single day. Victory after victory followed. He created a new system in Europe, a French-dominated empire. He placed his brothers and marshals on the thrones of conquered nations, spreading French law, administration, and the metric system, but also French power. For a time, it seemed nothing could stop him. His empire stretched from the coast of Spain to the borders of Russia. He was the undisputed master of Europe. But even the brightest star must eventually fade, and the seeds of his downfall were being sown even at the height of his power. The beginning of the end for Napoleon's empire can be traced to one catastrophic decision: the invasion of Russia in 1812. It was a gamble on a scale the world had never seen. Frustrated by Tsar Alexander I's refusal to comply with this continental blockade of Britain, Napoleon assembled the largest European army in history. Over 600,000 soldiers from France and its allied states, the Grande Army, marched east, a seemingly invincible force destined to bring the Tsar to heel. Napoleon expected a quick, decisive battle, another Austerlitz, but the Russians refused to play his game. They adopted a scorched earth policy, retreating deeper and deeper into the vastness of Russia, burning villages and crops as they went. The French army, accustomed to living off the land, found itself marching through a barren, desolate wasteland. Their supply lines, already stretched to the breaking point, began to fail. The farther they marched, the weaker they became, plagued by disease, desertion, and constant harassment from Russian Cossacks. After a brutal and bloody battle at Borodino, which was technically a French victory but at a horrific cost, Napoleon finally entered a deserted and burning Moscow. He expected the Tsar to sue for peace, but no message came. The Tsar simply waited. As the weeks turned into a month, Napoleon realized his position was untenable. With winter approaching, he had no choice but to order a retreat. And what a retreat it was! It became one of the great horror stories of military history. The infamous Russian winter, General Winter as it came to be called, descended upon the retreating army with merciless fury. Temperatures plummeted, snow and ice turned roads into frozen traps. Soldiers, starving and dressed in tattered summer uniforms, froze to death in their thousands. They were relentlessly hunted by Russian partisans and the pursuing army. The retreat became a desperate, chaotic fight for survival. Of the more than 600,000 men who had marched into Russia, fewer than 100,000 staggered back out. The Grande Army was destroyed. Napoleon's aura of invincibility was shattered forever. The wolves of Europe, sensing his weakness, began to gather for the kill. The disastrous Russian campaign was a wound from which Napoleon would never recover. The myth of his invincibility was broken, and his enemies, smelling blood, formed a new and powerful coalition against him. Britain, Russia, Prussia, Austria, and Sweden united to finally bring down the French Emperor. The war that followed, the War of the Sixth Coalition, culminated in the massive Battle of Leipzig in 1813, also known as the Battle of Nations. There, Napoleon suffered a decisive defeat. His German allies deserted him, and he was forced to retreat back to France. The Allied armies invaded France itself in 1814, despite a series of brilliant, small-scale victories where the old Napoleon flashed his genius. He was hopelessly outnumbered. His own marshals, weary of endless war, turned against him and urged him to abdicate. Faced with the inevitable, he did so, and was exiled to the small Mediterranean island of Elba. The Bourbon monarchy was restored to France. It seemed the Napoleonic saga was over, but Napoleon was not a man to accept defeat. In less than a year, he escaped from Elba, landed in France, and began a remarkable march to Paris. The soldiers sent to arrest him instead flocked to his banner, chanting Vive l'Empereur. He reclaimed his throne without a single shot being fired, beginning the period known as the 100 Days. The powers of Europe, however, were not going to let him rule again. They immediately declared him an outlaw and mobilized their armies. The final showdown came on June 18, 1815, on a muddy field in modern-day Belgium, near a small village called Waterloo. Napoleon faced a combined British and Allied army under the Duke of Wellington, with the Prussian army under Marshal Blucher racing to join the battle. It was a brutal, bloody, back-and-forth affair. For hours, the fate of Europe hung in the balance. But in the late afternoon, the Prussians arrived and smashed into Napoleon's flank. The French army, exhausted and outnumbered, finally broke and fled. The Battle of Waterloo was a complete and final defeat. This time, there would be no second chances. Napoleon abdicated once more. The British took him into custody and exiled him to the most remote place they could find. St. Helena, a tiny, windswept volcanic rock in the middle of the South Atlantic Ocean, thousands of miles from anywhere. It was there, under constant guard, that the man who once ruled an empire would spend the last 6 years of his life, dictating his memoirs and crafting his own legend. He died in 1821, at the age of 51. Napoleon's legacy remains as complex and debated as the man himself. Was he a tyrant who plunged Europe into a generation of war, causing millions of deaths? Or was he a visionary leader who modernized France, spread revolutionary ideals of equality and law, and forged the template of the modern state? The truth is, he was both. He was a son of the revolution who became an emperor, a brilliant military commander whose ambition knew no bounds, a legend whose shadow still looms large over the pages of history. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this journey into the life of Napoleon, please like, share, and subscribe for more stories from history.